Welcome to Nightowl Speaks. I'm Gary Wilson. Today's talk is called The Perfect Storm. This is my personal take on the worldwide problem of addiction. Nightowl Speaks hopes that you enjoy the presentation and it gives you some food for thought. In his paradigm-shifting 2015 book, Chasing the Scream, Johann Hari looks at how we need to address addiction with a completely different mindset. He begins by exploring how the policies of most countries around the world still follow the all-too-prevalent hardline approach to illicit drug use, and how this grew out of the USA's nearly century-old alcohol prohibition days. Many countries still continue to take a hard line to this day. As many stakeholders have long since tried to point out, addiction and the myriad of problems that stem from it are a medical and psychosocial issue, and needs to be taken out of the courts and moved into the treatment clinics of this world. As a coalface family medical practitioner, I have long held this belief. Johann's book, like many others, points out the extremely close correlation between childhood trauma and subsequent addiction. Now, the definition of addiction is simple. The genesis of addiction is complex, and the successful non-relapse ridden treatment of addiction is much harder. But what is addiction, and from where does it arise? First, let us define what addiction is. Addiction happens when someone compulsively engages in behaviour such as drug taking, gambling, drinking alcohol, overeating or gaming, even in the presence of harmful effects and damaging fallout. It is often said that a particular substance is addictive when in actual effect this would appear not to be the case. The vast majority of people who drink alcohol or gamble, use illicit drugs, or take prescription painkillers including opiates don't continue usage to a harmful level. They are able to stop whatever they imbibe in with relative ease. Some recreational drug users are able to indulge just Friday and Saturday nights and then comfortably return to the office on a Monday morning. I remember the Chatswood cocaine set, as they were known, when I worked many years ago in Sydney, whereby they could imbibe on the weekend and return to the office and be fully functional. The tendency to become addicted is in the person, not in the molecule. Why this is so, in a moment. A common misperception is that addiction is a choice or moral problem, and all you have to do is stop. But nothing could be further from the truth, says Dr. George Koob, director of the USA's NIH National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. And in his book, The Biology of Desire, Mark Lewis, himself a cognitive neuroscientist and former addict, makes a convincing case for addiction not even being a disease, and that the disease model has actually become an obstacle to healing. Lewis speaks of addiction as an unintended consequence of the brain doing what it's supposed to do, which is to seek pleasure, seek reward, and seek relief, especially now in a world that's too fast, not cooperating, and is too confronting. My encapsulation of the idea of addiction is rooted in our biology. Mankind's success as a species is based in our wonderfully complex, but at times self-deceiving brain. We learn quickly, and we learn by repetition. Our neurons reinforce behaviour through learning and encoding memory. It achieves this through a process called long-term potentiation, or LTP. LTP is best defined as the main way that neuroplasticity, that is, changes in nerve synapse connections, become ingrained. This is particularly the case in the parts of our brain that define us as an individual, our neocortex, or new brain, and the parts responsible for memory, and from that, learning, which is the hippocampus, of which there are two, one on each side of the brain. The hippocampi are richly connected to our more primitive and emotional centers and play a critical role in the formation, organization, and storage of new memories, as well as connecting certain sensations and emotions to these memories. LTP shows all of the features associated with a large information storage device, that is to say, rapid data uptake, but long-term retention, and also associability, that is, cross-linkages with other brain regions. So, what does all this gobbledygook mean? Well, it means behaviour is rooted in memory and emotion, especially when there is a pleasure response, and will show massive perseverance, be it good or bad. What I'm saying is, our brain is designed for repetitive and thereby addictive behaviour. But then, why do some of us not have an off switch and become an addict? The answer to this seems to be twofold. And yes, it comes back to both nature and nurture, like most things. Firstly, the environment a person grows up in and how this shapes their personality formation and behaviour massively influences whether he or she becomes addicted. Everyone can appreciate that the neglected, abused, and traumatized child will lack self-belief and self-reliance, have poor psychological resilience, and heightened emotionality and vulnerability. Often childhood traumas can be subtle though, such as bullying or merciless teasing by an older sibling, or deeply ingrained body image issues. In essence, the child can remain stuck developmentally and doesn't develop adult levels of coping strategies, including the ability to self-soothe. However, not all addicts have been traumatized in childhood. Some may have been massively indulged, become entitled, and bored with life. They've been given everything and see the need for more. However, there are many and varied environmental influences that may have contributed. These can include socioeconomic class and peer group pressure. All these points will be expanded upon in future articles and videos as we delve deeper into the complex world of addiction. Secondly, it has long been recognized that heredity plays a massive role in addiction. Indeed, for some, biology seems to play more of a role, and it just needs a social trigger. For example, I've seen many a case where grandfather was an alcoholic, the son was a lifelong marijuana addict, and the grandson becomes an amphetamine addict. Scientists estimate that genetic factors account for 40 to 60% of a person's vulnerability to addiction. But the exact percentage doesn't matter, and it very likely varies between individuals. This biological predisposition appears to be due to the genetically determined production of proteins that are central to the release of virtually all of the brain's neurotransmitters, but especially dopamine, the pleasure principle neurotransmitter. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter targeted by all of the common legal and illegal drugs, including nicotine, alcohol, opiates, and cocaine. But it's not just drugs that target dopamine, it's anything that reinforces the aim of improved survival. Even when a person does something as simple as eating, the brain recognizes that they are doing something right, that is to say, something good for survival. As a result, it releases feel-good chemicals in the reward system, mainly dopamine, and the mind interprets this as pleasurable. The brain is hardwired to seek out behaviors that release dopamine in the reward system. As a family doctor, I have heard many thousands of stories and many variations in how people do life. You hear everything from, "Oh, I'm such an addictive personality. I gave up cigarettes and booze and became a gym junkie. I was then 60 kilos and felt great, but then I became obsessed with it. Then I became a food junkie and blew up to 120 kilos. Now I'm down to 80 again, but I'm back on the bottle." But then you get instances of, "I was so ill and I was on massive dosages of painkillers and totally reliant on others for my recovery. I was in pain emotionally and physically and despairing. I was scared. You know, I can see how people could get hooked on those pills, but for me, there's no way in the world I'd ever give up control of my life to a pill. I was off them as soon as possible." For my part, I identify with the second stance. But then I had a great childhood and have no biological family history of addiction. Had I grown up with a weaker notion of self and with childhood traumas to bury, or with different biology, it could be a very different story. This again raises the notion of how one sees oneself fitting into the world, invokes ideas of self-love, self-image, self-respect, autonomy, and self-reliance, and importantly, psychological resilience and the ability to self-soothe when things aren't right. But far more importantly, it focuses the spotlight on when there is an abject lack of these things. A poor childhood punctuated by neglect or traumas will generate no self-reliance, but rather substance reliance instead. Now remember that the abused child's brain has become hardwired to often make poor decisions and choices, and feels the need to self-soothe to calm their inner discomfort or sadness. It's also poor at connecting action with consequence. If the mind hasn't had the internal resources, then it will seek it externally in an effort to feel better. This is called affect regulation. Add in a strong biological predisposition to not having an off switch, the reward of pleasure, an immediate but brief escape from an emotionally painful present or painful past, and you have all of the conditions for the perfect storm, as I call it. Remember, only a small percentage of people become true addicts, and interestingly, this biological bias seems not to be universal and equal for all illicit substances. And research from around the world supports this observation. Many a patient has said to me how they had little or no resistance with, for example, amphetamines, but have tried heroin and found no ongoing interest in or addiction to opiates of any kind. Yet others have said marijuana was not their thing, even in the presence of anxiety, other than it may have helped them switch off and go to sleep. It often depends on their brain chemistry, their personality formulation, what effect a particular substance has on their brain, and hence what effect they are seeking. The undiagnosed and untreated ADH brain, interestingly enough, is naturally drawn to illicit amphetamines, the very class of pharmaceuticals that effectively improve their brain chemistry and improve their social functioning. Some addicts' minds are not discriminatory, however. If the drive to escape reality is overpowering and their locus of control is poor, some will become polysubstance abusers. Your brain's reward systems initially evolved to enhance your chances of survival. It makes you seek pleasure in the form of eating, drinking, play, human bonding and sex, even exercise. Your brain reinforces positive behavior by switching on these circuits, largely driven by dopamine, to make you want to do it again and again. However, there's a trick in the tail. The mammalian brain is not set in stone, and so over time, it adapts to this pleasurable stimulus. The human brain tends to habituate to any stimulus. I often say, even lying on a poolside lounge sipping cocktails loses its appeal after much repetition. This is because the reward receptors dull down in response to the addictive substance, and so you go back for more, and you need more. Today, when we look at the immense complexity of the neuroscience underpinning human behavior, the conceptual model we use is that of the mind-brain duality. The mind is you, and all that you experience from the womb and thereafter. Your brain is the physico-chemical machine in which the mind works. It is the most complex structure in the known universe. The mind-brain duality is a two-way street. Every experience shapes the brain through neuroplasticity. The brain, wonderfully complex yet fallible in turn, shapes our behavior, and not always for the better. If you're interested in the fascinating story of how the mind-brain is shaped from conception to adulthood, please read or watch our section entitled The Overarching Importance of Childhood in Shaping the Rest of Your Life. Meanwhile, for me, the take-home message from The Perfect Storm is this. Until one understands the nature and nurture of someone who is addicted, be it to food, gambling, alcohol, or illicit substances, don't stand in judgment. Addiction is already a life sentence. Addiction is not a lifestyle choice, and it's not to be punished. Save the judgment and punishment for they who are the profiteers from drug trafficking. This is Gary Wilson from Nightowl Speaks, and thank you for listening. See you soon.